My wife laughed at me for being too sentimental about family traditions. But when I discovered she had been secretly selling heirlooms I inherited, I realized her cruelty wasn't just emotional, it was calculated. At the next family dinner, I placed the receipts on the table. The silence was heavier than any insult. I still remember the morning everything shifted. I was standing in the living room holding my father's old pocket watch, wiping a bit of dust from the glass. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own breathing. Then my wife walked in, glanced at me and let out a laugh that didn't sound playful anymore. "You and that old stuff," she said, shaking her head. "One day you'll drown in memories." She walked off before I could answer. It wasn't the words that bothered me, it was the tone. Dismissive. Like I was doing something foolish. I stood there with the watch in my hand, feeling a small pinch in my chest that I tried to ignore. For years her teasing felt harmless. She'd joke when I polished my mother's silver spoon or straightened the frame of my parents' wedding photo. I thought it was just her way of being light-hearted. But lately something had changed. Her laughter lingered too long. Her comments carried an edge. And I found myself putting things away faster, as if hiding them would keep the peace. I didn't want to admit it, but I had started feeling embarrassed for caring about the things that connected me to the people I'd lost. Each heirloom had a story. My father's watch wasn't just a watch. It was the last thing he handed me before he passed. My grandmother's ring had been on her finger every Sunday when she baked bread. The wooden box my grandfather carved held tiny notes he wrote to my mother when she was a child. These weren't objects to me. They were pieces of my family, pieces of myself. Whenever I held them, I felt grounded. Safe. But my wife's impatience with them grew stronger with each passing month. She'd sigh when she saw me dusting the shelves. She'd roll her eyes when I opened the wooden box to show a visiting niece the carvings. It felt like she wasn't just annoyed by the items, she was annoyed by the memories they carried. The first real jolt came one afternoon when I reached for my grandfather's ring. It always sat in a small dish on my dresser. I kept it there so I could touch it before leaving the house, a quiet habit that made me feel connected to him. But that day the dish was empty. I checked the drawer, the pockets of my jackets, even the bathroom counter. Nothing. I stood there, staring at the empty dish, feeling a strange heaviness settle in my stomach. I told myself I must have moved it. Maybe I'd worn it and forgotten. Maybe I'd put it somewhere safe. I repeated those excuses until they sounded almost believable. But deep down, a quiet worry began to grow, like a small crack forming in a window. A week later, we had a small argument that left me unsettled. I was sitting at the dining table holding the wooden box my grandfather carved. I had taken it out to clean it, running my fingers over the grooves he carved by hand. My wife walked by, glanced at the box and let out a sharp laugh. "You're still keeping that old thing? It's falling apart. Why don't you throw it out already?" Her voice wasn't teasing this time. It was irritated, almost angry. I looked up at her, surprised. "It's not just a box," I said quietly. She rolled her eyes. "Everything in this house is not just something with you." Then she walked away, leaving me sitting there with the box in my hands, feeling like I'd been scolded for holding on to a memory. After that, small things began to bother me. Items weren't where I left them. A frame tilted in a way I never tilted it. A drawer slightly open when I knew I had closed it. When I asked her about it, she brushed me off. "You probably forgot," she'd say. Or, "You're always moving things around." Her answers were vague, quick, and delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She also developed a sudden interest in cleaning out clutter. She'd walk around the house with a trash bag, humming to herself, opening drawers and cabinets. When I asked what she was doing, she'd say, "Just trying to make the place look nicer." But her hands always seemed to linger near the shelves where I kept my family things. One afternoon, I came home early from running errands. The house was quiet, but I heard movement in the bedroom. When I walked in, she jumped slightly as if startled. She was standing near my dresser, the drawer where I kept the ring that had gone missing. She smiled quickly. "Just organizing," she said. Her voice was too cheerful, too quick. I nodded, but something inside me tightened. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to accuse her of anything without proof. But the unease that had been growing inside me finally settled into something heavier. A few days later, I found a small slip of paper tucked under a stack of envelopes on the kitchen counter. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a receipt from groceries. It was from a pawn shop across town. The item listed was vague, but the date matched the week my grandfather's ring disappeared. My hands went cold. I stared at the paper for a long time trying to make sense of it. I didn't want to believe what my mind was telling me. I didn't want to think she could do something like that. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket, feeling my heart beat harder than it had in years. The next morning I drove to the pawn shop. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself I'd walk in, ask a few questions and leave feeling foolish. But when I stepped inside, the shopkeeper looked up and greeted me like he recognized me. "Back again?" he asked. I froze. "I've never been here before," I said. He frowned, then shrugged. "Your wife comes in often. Thought you were together." My stomach dropped. I didn't ask anything else. I didn't need to. I walked out of the shop feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted. That was the moment the joke stopped feeling harmless. That was the moment I realized something was terribly wrong. I walked out of that pawn shop with the air feeling heavier than it had when I walked in. The street looked the same. Cars passing, people chatting, a child tugging at his mother's sleeve, but everything inside me had shifted. I kept replaying the shopkeeper's words, the casual way he mentioned my wife as if she were a familiar customer. I tried to steady my breathing, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I told myself to go home, sit down, think clearly. But something pulled me back toward the shop window. And that's when I saw it, my grandmother's brooch. It sat in the display case, catching the light the same way it used to when she pinned it to her Sunday dress. I stepped closer, pressing my hand against the glass without realizing it. The gold edges, the tiny stones, the delicate curve, it was unmistakable. I hadn't seen it in months, but I had assumed it was tucked safely in the drawer where I kept the rest of her things. Seeing it there, tagged with a price, made my chest tighten. I walked back inside, trying to keep my voice steady as I pointed at the brooch. "Where did this come from?" I asked. The owner looked at me with a kind of quiet understanding, as if he already knew what I was about to hear. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small slip of paper. "Came in last month," he said softly. "Your wife brought it." He handed me the receipt, and there it was, her name written clearly without hesitation. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling something inside me crack in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. That single piece of paper changed everything. It wasn't just about the brooch. It was about trust. About the life I thought we were building together. About the person I believed she was. I folded the receipt and slipped it into my pocket, but the weight of it felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I didn't confront her that day. I didn't even go straight home. Instead, I drove around town, stopping at another pawn shop I remembered passing years ago. I told myself it was pointless, that I wouldn't find anything. But part of me needed to know. Needed to see how deep this went. The second shop was smaller, dimly lit, with shelves packed tightly together. I walked slowly, scanning each display. And then I saw it. My father's old fountain pen. The one he used to sign every birthday card he ever gave me. My throat tightened. I asked the clerk about it, and once again a receipt appeared. Her name. Same handwriting. Same pattern. I thanked him and stepped outside, leaning against the wall as the truth settled deeper into my bones. Over the next few days I visited more shops. Some were across town, some tucked into quiet corners I'd never noticed before. Each visit brought another piece of my past staring back at me from behind glass. My mother's silver spoon. The carved wooden bird my uncle made. A small locket with a faded picture of my grandparents. Every item came with a receipt. Every receipt had her name. And with each discovery the picture became clearer. This wasn't a single mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a pattern she had built carefully, quietly, without a hint of guilt. At home I acted as if nothing had changed. I made coffee in the mornings, asked about her day, laughed at the right moments. But inside I was watching everything. I noticed how she kept her phone close, even when she walked from one room to another. I noticed how she avoided the hallway where I kept the remaining heirlooms, as if the shelves themselves made her uncomfortable. She talked more about decluttering, about fresh starts, about letting go of old things. Before, I thought she was just following some trend she saw online. Now every word felt like a hint I had missed. One evening she stood in the living room with a donation box, tossing in books, old scarves, and a few picture frames. "We don't need all this," she said lightly. "It's time to simplify." I nodded, pretending to agree, but my eyes drifted to the empty spaces on the shelves. Spaces where memories used to sit. spaces she had quietly cleared without asking. I felt a slow burn in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "Just don't throw away anything important," I said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course not," she replied. And I knew she was lying. A few days later, I visited my elderly aunt. She lived in a small house filled with plants and soft blankets, the kind of place that always smelled like warm tea. She welcomed me with a hug, her hands gentle and warm. We sat at her kitchen table and I told her I'd been thinking about the old family stories. She smiled, her eyes lighting up as she talked about my grandmother's brooch, how she wore it to every family gathering. She told me how my grandfather carved the wooden box during a long winter, shaping it by the fire. She even remembered the day my father bought his fountain pen, proud as ever to own something so fine. Listening to her brought back memories I hadn't thought about in years. Her voice was soft, steady, filled with love for the people we had lost. And as she spoke, something inside me strengthened. These weren't just objects. They were pieces of our history. Pieces of the people who shaped me. Letting them disappear quietly wasn't an option anymore. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. I couldn't keep swallowing the truth just to keep the peace. When I left her house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. I sat in my car for a moment, holding the folder where I had placed all the receipts. Dozens of them. Each one a reminder of how far this had gone. I knew I couldn't confront her alone. She was too quick with excuses, too skilled at turning things around. I needed a place where the truth couldn't be twisted. A place where she couldn't hide behind charm or laughter. That's when the idea came to me: family dinner. A gathering where everyone who loved me would be present. A place where the truth would have weight. I pictured the table, the familiar faces, the warmth of shared meals. And I knew that was where everything needed to come out. Not in anger, not in chaos, but in the presence of people who understood the value of the memories she had tried to erase. I closed the folder, placed it on the passenger seat and started the car. The decision was made. The path was set. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I drove home with the folder resting on the passenger seat, the street lights flickering across its surface as if trying to warn me of the weight it carried. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky had turned a deep shade of blue, and the house looked strangely still, as if it sensed what was coming. I stepped inside quietly, carrying the folder under my arm, and placed it in the drawer of my desk. I didn't want her to see it, not yet. The decision was made, but the moment had to be right. And that moment would be at the family dinner. When the evening finally arrived, I felt a tightness in my chest that didn't ease even as I buttoned my shirt. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I slipped the folder under my arm and walked to the car. The drive felt longer than usual, every turn stretching out like the road itself was testing my resolve. By the time I reached my sister's house, the driveway was already full. Laughter drifted from the backyard, warm and familiar, but it only made the knot in my stomach tighten. I stepped inside, greeted by the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread. My sister hugged me, unaware of the storm I carried with me. "Everyone's outside," she said with a smile. I nodded, adjusting the folder under my arm, and walked toward the patio. The lights strung overhead cast a soft glow across the table, where my family sat chatting, passing dishes, sharing stories. My wife was already there, laughing at something my cousin said. She looked relaxed, comfortable, completely unaware of the truth sitting inches from my hand. I took my seat beside her, placing the folder on my lap. My heart beat harder with every passing minute. I tried to join the conversation, but my voice felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. My wife leaned toward me at one point and whispered, "You're quiet tonight." I forced a small smile. "Just tired," I said. She nodded and turned back to the table, laughing again when someone mentioned an old family tradition of ours, one she had always teased me about. That laugh. Light, dismissive, the same one she used whenever she brushed off my memories. Hearing it now, surrounded by the people who understood the value of those memories, gave me the final push I needed. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't rehearse anything. I simply reached for the folder, placed it on the table, and opened it. The sound of paper sliding against paper was soft, but it cut through the conversation like a blade. One by one, I laid the receipts out in front of me. The table fell silent. My cousin stopped mid-sentence. My sister's fork hovered in the air. My wife's laughter faded instantly. She stared at the papers, her smile slipping, confusion flickering across her face before something else, something sharper, took its place. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The names, the dates, the items, they spoke for themselves. My aunt leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "Is that the brooch?" she whispered. My wife's eyes darted from face to face, searching for an escape. "This is ridiculous," she said quickly. "He's misunderstanding something." But her voice trembled and everyone heard it. My sister picked up one of the receipts, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "You sold these?" she asked quietly. My wife opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "We needed space. He keeps everything. I was just trying to help." Her words came out rushed, uneven, as if she was trying to build a wall out of excuses before the truth could reach her. But the truth was already there, spread across the table for everyone to see. My uncle, who rarely spoke during family gatherings, cleared his throat. "These aren't just things," he said gently. "These are pieces of our family." His voice carried a weight that settled over the entire table. My wife's face tightened. "You're all overreacting," she snapped. "They were just old items collecting dust." She looked at me then, her eyes sharp. "You're making a scene for no reason." I felt something inside me settle, calm, steady, unshakable. "They weren't just items," I said quietly. "You knew that." My voice wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was simply honest. And that honesty seemed to shake her more than any accusation could have. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. My family looked at me with sympathy, at her with disappointment, and at the receipts with a kind of sadness that filled the space between us. My wife tried to speak again, but the words tangled in her throat. She looked smaller somehow, as if the truth had taken away the confidence she always carried. My cousin finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you just talk to him?" he asked her gently. "Why hide it?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth was too clear now. The dinner continued, but the warmth was gone. Conversations were quiet, careful. My wife barely touched her food. I sat there, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. It wasn't just about the heirlooms anymore. It was about trust, respect, the foundation of a marriage that had been cracking long before I noticed. When the evening ended, my family hugged me a little tighter than usual. My aunt squeezed my hand, her eyes soft with understanding. My sister whispered, "You didn't deserve this." I nodded, unable to speak. The drive home was silent. My wife stared out the window, her arms crossed tightly. When we reached the house, she walked inside without a word. I stayed in the car for a moment, breathing in the quiet night air, letting the truth settle fully. Inside, the house felt different. Not empty, just honest. The kind of honesty that hurts but also frees you. I placed the folder on the table, knowing the next steps would come in their own time. For now the truth was out. The silence had spoken. And in that silence I found something I hadn't felt in a long time: my own strength.